Hello. Hello, and welcome to part one of 3 for the introduction today. And before we get started, I want to give you a quick introduction to the books which are going to be used. Hopefully this is not too quiet, and hopefully this is coming through okay. So, for Skype earlier, I had to... I probably look a little bit like a panda. Skype earlier, I had to up my volume and gain to maximum on the microphone. I have adjusted it way down for doing this, so hopefully that is good. It's good quality sound coming through. So before we start today, we're looking at the English channel. It's a patron number 7, suggested by Paul, and we're looking at the war in the English channel versus the E-boat or Schnellboot. So, Dog Boats of War. Written by Leonard C. Reynolds, OBE and BSc, with forward by Admiral of the Fleet Lord Lewin. Very good. British Warship Camouflage World War II, Malcolm Wright. This is volume 1, I think, the original one, yeah. It's destroyers, frigates, escorts, minesweepers, coastal warfare craft, submarines, and auxiliaries. Going to be coming up in this one. Allied Coastal Forces of World War II. Fairmile Designs and US Submarine Chasers, Volume 1. And Vosper, MTBs, and US Echoes, Volume 2. There is also going to be being used The Tribals by Martin H. Bryce and my own book. Why? Because there are sections in it which are relevant. And probably Sloops, 1926 and 1946 by Arnold Haig. And there's going to be a couple of, especially in part 3, a couple of journal articles mentioned, which I will explain when we're in there. So, hope you enjoyed all that. Let's start off with the slideshow. Part 1. How the RN encountered E-boats or Schnellboots in the English Channel, as proposed by Paul. Now, this is a fun topic. And in many ways, it's an interesting juxtaposition of the topic, because traditionally, when you start talking about this kind of warfare, you will hear a lot of people talk about the great technology, the beautiful of the E-boats and how successful they were, or Schnellboots. The British counters, though, are fairly interesting. And this is the thing. This presentation is focused on how the RN countered the E-boats. Okay. Which is why I am probably going to refer to them more often not as E-boats through the presentation, because I'm talking from an Allied perspective and how the RN countered them. Okay? If I was talking about it from a German perspective and how German operations they were planning, I would be calling them Schnellboots. So, it's a habit I've got into over the years when I'm teaching it. So, that's what will be happening here. Right, so some stats and geography for the English Channel. It's roughly 350 miles long. It's 150 miles at its widest, 21 miles at its narrowest. That's the Straits of Dover. Encompasses roughly 29,000 square miles in area. And basically, it's Britain's weak spot. It is Britain's weak spot, and Britain knows this. What is also interesting is it's divided into multiple commands. Technically, There is the Dover Command. Then there is the Portsmouth and Portsmouth Command, but there's also a bit of a Portland Command. Then there's the Plymouth Command. And the various other ones around there. There are lots of different sections which have command and control. Why? Because it's a very busy sea lane, it's very narrow, and therefore you want to make your OODA loop as short as possible. And in the period of very limited communications range, this made sense. It made a lot of sense. So, the question is always, how much are those commands going to cooperate with each other? Well, that depends. But when it comes to dealing with the S-boat, Schnellboot, or E-boat, which displaced about 100 tons, had a length of 32.76 meters, a beam of 5.06 meters, a draft of 1.47 meters, and a top speed of 43.8 knots, relying on them actually having all parts maintained, having everything, all the parts to do the maintenance, and of course being fully operational, and having actually good quality fuel. All those provisions allowing, and sea states, of course, allowing, that was their top speed. Complement 24 to 30, armament 2 21-inch torpedo tubes with 4 torpedoes so they could reload, 3 20mm cannon, 1 single, 1 twin mount, and 1 37mm flat cannon. So, a well-armed little ship. What were the plans? And this is where it gets really sort of different, interesting. The British had plans for war. France wasn't supposed to fall. Norway was not supposed to fall. Both of them were not supposed to fall. So the plans for war were motor torpedo boats were supposed to be for protecting the East Coast. Yes. As sort of been used for in the previous war, patrolling the Channel minefields to make sure no one played around and got rid of them as they were barring access to the Channel. Yeah. Supplementing trawlers and corvettes on the coastal convoy routes. Well, you know, it makes sense. It gives them a little extra firepower very cheaply. Provide protection for colonial assets to allow for the concentration of large units in the theatre of conflict. Yeah. Idea is you deploy a lot of these little ships around the world and you can withdraw some of your sloops, which are quite useful for minesweeping duties and anti-submarine warfare patrols. Reality wasn't so nice. France fell. Ouch. Norway fell. Very big ouch. So they had to secure the channel somehow without a minefield. They had to support operations in Norway, and now you have all sorts of things complicated. This is why you get a massive burst in British construction of motor torpedo boats and motor gun boats and all these things. Some which originally are started up to be anti-submarine warfare vessels, but then they're found to be too small even for that. And so are converted to gunboats. You have all sorts of vessels involved. And that's Nowhere better illustrated than this book. So, chapter 12 of Malcolm Wright's book. All these are different types that I come up with during the war. Now, some of them are different variations of types. Vosper are brilliant because they produce the Vosper Type 1, the Vosper Type 2, the Vosper 1940, 1941, 1942, 1943, 1944. It's just fun. There's all sorts of various things, and we're going to get into a few of these classes while wandering through here, but there are a lot more options than just one or two. And then there's the very, very ubiquitous Fairmile B class, which are adapted quite quickly, can be adapted into motor torpedo boats, into motor gun boats, and are quite freely adapted into those, or given depth charges and told they're anti-submarine warfare escorts. The point is, these vessels become very quickly and massively adapted. But they do have one particularly important enemy they have to deal with, and that is this. Because the Schnellboot, well, honestly, it's designed with perhaps the North Sea in mind a little bit. More focusing on the Barents Sea and the Baltic, I would say, in some of its design sort of orientations. Baltic maybe more than the Barents. I just always think of the Barents first. And therefore, in the Channel, it has a rather interesting scenario on it, because the Channel isn't as rough as the North Sea. Isn't quite as calm as the Baltic is, because remember, it is a spur of the Atlantic which gets narrowed down to a point and then comes face to face with the North Sea. So, that's not really a fun configuration for anyone. But leaving that to one side, it is water where they are more likely to be able to get up to their top high speeds. Again, 43.8 knots. There are people who say that they've learned them that they went faster. They might have done. Honestly, you've got powerful enough engines. If you drop all weight and you've gone down, then you might well be able to get an extra knot on a bit out of it. But they also didn't operate at that speed a lot of the time. And the British did develop counters to them very quickly. But these are the genesis at the beginning. You have the Vosper, 73 foot. And you can tell that's an early Vosper because it hasn't got any sort of cut down, raise up bit. It's all very nice planing hull. It's the same with the Fairmile Type A, which is the genesis for all the subsequent Fairmiles. B, C, D, E, all of them either come from techniques developed for it or from the actual hull being adapted. It's quite fun to look at some of that, how they go and develop along. Let's see. We'll go with this one. All right. There is a very nice word for the hull design, and I don't want to get it wrong. Sorry about this. I'll just pause it while I hunt it up. So, always helps when you look in the right chapter. Two essential elements for achieving high speeds on water, engines providing enough power for their weight and hulls which would plane, were first brought together in the early years of the 20th century. Much work was done, notably by Sir John I. Thornycroft, in reciprocating engines, and Sir Charles Parsons, with the steam turbine, developed hulls, plants of high power weight ratio, and fit them in easily driven hulls and narrow beam and rounded sections. For example, torpedo boat HMS Lightning, designed and built by Thornycroft in 1876 for waterline length of 81 feet, achieved a speed of 18.5 knots with a two-cylinder compound steam engine of just 390 horsepower. IHP, which I seem to remember is internal horsepower, but I might be wrong at this point. She was a pioneer in the field of naval torpedo carrying small craft, the forerunner of the destroyer Sir Charles Parsons produced Turbina, which achieved 35 knots at the Fleet Review of 1887. There was nothing there to catch her. The idea of planing craft designed to lift, or in terms of patent officer definition, reduce their draft, is attributed to Reverend C.M. Maramus, who was granted a patent in 1872. His design was for a stepped hydroplane of roughly flat bottom form. Thornycroft patented in 1877 another stepped hydroplane form with injection of air under pressure at the step. Now, rather like with seaplanes and Spitfires and all these things, the ground for the develop this was all the races which were going on. And the hydroplaning hull is the critical thing, as are the engines. And actually, interesting enough, the Vospers, the first ones, then start off using Italian engines, which were originally ordered for Russian MTBs. But that order kind of fell through, so they ended up with Packards. Because that's the next best thing you can find. Fair miles, well, the Fairmile A is turned into the Fairmile B, which is an early runner of what you would call the modern Stanflex system, really, in that they are fitted with lots of steel holding points along their hull, and they can have weapons interchanged in and out, so they can be turned into a regular motor launch, or they can be turned into a torpedo boat, or depth charges, or all these sorts of things quite quickly, within 48 hours using a crane. So very early, very adaptable system. Fairmile Type A produces about 12 working vessels. The Fairmile Type B, we're talking well into, well, very nearly 1,400 working vessels. So they are quite prolific. And they're all built with a similar sort of style, hydroplaning hull. And they're, well, let's put it this way. They are more complicated woodwork than a Mosquito. Right. Dunkirk. Now, that is Vosper 70-foot M102. That's the actual original. Well, one of the original Vosper 70-foot vessels. There is a debate over whether or not it's the original one. I treat it as the original one because it's the original one which actually gets any work done. basically how Vosper originally gets the construction. They build it entirely off spec. And it's a private venture boat. So that's 102. And it's their private venture. So, yeah. And it's the fastest thing available. That's a motor torpedo boat for the British at the time of Dunkirk, really. There are other vessels coming through. They are all under construction. They all started being ordered in 1939. But by the time you get Dunkirk, not a lot of them have come into existence. Believe it or not, even these little boats are not that quick to get involved. Why? Or get built. Primarily because of engine supply. They use very similar engines to fighter aircraft. And no one wants to give them Merlins. A few do end up at sea with Merlins. And some end up at sea with Griffins. And even some end up at sea with a Napier Sabre in there. But leaving that all to one side, it's not the rule. So Ramsay uses this vessel because it gets him there overnight and back in the hours of darkness, which is what is essential for him, what is essential for his operations. It allows him to go and survey himself exactly what is happening. Interesting enough, rarely does it use longer route. It usually uses either route X or route Z, not usually route Y. But he does use it, and it provides him with speed. Now, the thing is, this is all about how the British were countering the Schnellboots, and really, Dunkirk was the first encounter the British had with them. In that, on the 29th, the Royal Navy destroyer Wakeful is sunk off Dunkirk by the S-30. Now, S-30 is one of those boats which does seem to have quite a successful career. And this is really the first British encounter with these rather large vessels. And why am I saying rather large? Well, let's consider it. The Vosper 70-foot the Vosper 70-foot, 73-foot vessels were all less than 50 tons in weight. The Fairmile B, which I've already talked about, at maximum displaces 85 tons. As we mentioned, the Schnellboot is 100 tons. That's a lot of boat. It is a lot. And it's something which the British have to work out how to counter quite quickly, because they are suddenly faced with the British worst nightmare. British foreign policy for arguably since Charles II. Possibly you can go back to Oliver Cromwell, has been very much strongly of the belief, and actually Henry VIII probably as well, possibly even Henry VII, probably Edward. Yeah. As long as there have been kings, queens, prime ministers, anyone in charge of Britain who is actually looking into their security and wants to make sure the nation stays safe. British policy has been to make sure the coastline opposite us is as fractious and divided as possible. Not in a way which causes wars, because those are also bad for trade, but in a way which means that we are not that if one of them gets annoyed with us, we still have all the others we can go and trade with without having to worry about dealing with possibly starting a war or them trying to launch invading. And basically, that is the British plan. If we consider the British plan for World War II, if it had started in Europe, was that France was supposed to stay in the war, fight the land war. Britain would reinforce France, protect Belgium, and it would all be a rerun of World War One, just with tanks. That worked this time. That didn't happen. And so, as I've already mentioned, there is an explosion in need of these ships. But you do have a problem in that the available designs the British have already in production don't really match up with the Schnellboot, or EBoat as they're calling it. Plus, the Germans are taking over pretty much every other vessel they get their hands on. Danish, Dutch, Belgian patrol boats, variations on torpedo boats, all these things also get taken over. But, saying that, the British also have an advantage. E-boats have to carry torpedoes. There is a very good likelihood they're going to come up against a destroyer, something larger. Light guns aren't going to count in that kind of fight. You need the torpedo. That's your big ace in the hole. That's how you sink a destroyer. How you sink a bit large merchant ship. Torpedoes are heavy. You take them off, you have a lot of weight for other things. Like that, the E-boats carry 4 torpedoes. 2 in launchers, so they carry the weight of 2 launchers, but they also carry 2 extra torpedoes to reload, which also have to have facilities for moving them because they are heavy. So that's a lot of weight in the 100 tons. And they've still got to be light to be high speed, so they can't exactly be armoured. We'll be getting onto this all in part 2. So, hope you enjoyed part 1. I think I forgot to say at the beginning, if you like, please do the sort of thumbs up thing down below. If you would like to hear more, please subscribe and press the little bell down there. That's always very nice. And there are also links to the Discord and various other things down below in the description. So, go. Hope you enjoyed them. And thank you very much, and hope you join me for part 2, which will be out probably not long after this. Thank you. Take care.